How do you fix the US housing market? Lots of people have been talking about this for a long time, but Mark Zandi has just chimed in. Mark Zandi thinks we should eliminate capital gains when you sell your home. If you don't know what he's referring to, back in 1997, via the Taxpayer Relief Act, they passed a law that says if you sell your owner occupied home, you could profit the first 250K if single or 500K if married, tax free, meaning you owe the IRS nothing. Mark Zandi is saying it's time to revisit this Relief Act and maybe go back and index it for inflation because the world is very different from 1997. According to Mark Zandi's math, if you simply indexed 1997 to today, the numbers would be as followed. The first $500,000 if single or $1 million if married. Mark goes one step further and says, instead of indexing it for CPI, what if you indexed it for home prices? In that case, Mark does the math and says, instead of $250,000, you would get $885,000 if you're single, or $1.775 million if married. Shoot, at that point, why don't you just not have capital gains on your owner-occupied home? Now, when you step back and you look at this, I think it should be obvious that this is most impactful for, what do you want to say, high-priced areas, Silicon Valley, much of California, New York, Florida, maybe some other parts of the country. But this would certainly impact housing, although I don't know if it, quote unquote, fixes housing. In fact, I think it might land like a dud. I think the people that it helps baby boomers. Once again, baby boomers who bought their houses in the 50s or 70s or 80s or 90s or whatever, and they just happen to pick the right piece of dirt, they would see a huge windfall. For example, a city near me in Palo Alto, California, you could have picked something up in the 90s for a couple of $100,000 that might be worth $3 million today. And it's still outdated. It's crazy. So again, I think this impacts boomers. It impacts, I don't know, 15 to 20% of the country. But without question, this would unlock inventory. However, when I look at the broken housing market, I personally don't believe we have a problem above the median, right? If you're going to sell a $3 million 1950s build house in Palo Alto, California, you're not helping first-time home buyers. A first-time home buyer is not buying a $3 million home in Palo Alto. And that's the kind of inventory that would come. We're not going to unlock the 150K house, the 200K house. That stuff's already covered by the existing rules. So again, I think this calling this a fix for housing is a gigantic reach. It would unlock inventory, no doubt, but I believe it would unlock the wrong type of inventory. So again, that is my thoughts. Talking about housing, we did get pending home sales this morning, and once again, the doomers are wrong. Pending home sales were up 4% month on month, up 3.8%. Again, folks, these are August numbers. Why was that? Simply said, folks, rates matter. Rates matter. Rates have been slowly drifting down, and lower rates increases the pool of potential buyers. Much of the country is a buyer's market, so you're seeing the system work. So again, another economic number better than expected pending home sales. Another company looking at layoffs because of AI, Lufthansa airline out of Europe, says that they will be eliminating 4,000 jobs as they turn to AI to boost efficiency. I read an interesting article about wealth by generations, and this is pretty telling. To steal the punchline, there's about $100 trillion with a T, trillion dollars about to be passed on to Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. What do I mean? The silent generation. This is the generation pre-baby boomers. They have, as of today, $20.1 trillion in cumulative household wealth. Baby boomers, clearly the largest at $83.3 trillion in household wealth. Again, if you add 20 plus 83, you're over $103 trillion. Baby boomers and the silent generation. Gen X, my generation, 42.6 trillion. And then finally, millennials and Gen Z together, 17.1. All of this money will be, the greatest wealth transfer will be occurring over the next several decades. This is just how the system works. How about the Buffett indicator? I don't know if you guys have been following this, but the Buffett indicator is now over 200% plus, which is the highest ever. And actually beyond a level Warren Buffett once called playing with fire. I believe he stated that right before the GFC, and we all know what happened after that. We did get a look at household wealth, same article by country, which I thought was interesting. Let's talk about China first. In China, and this is why Evergrande and all those other housing issues were such a problem in China and why consumers were so wrecked. In China, 65% of a household's wealth is in property. Only 11% is in stocks. That's why in China, it is so much more painful when property values fall, because it really hits the consumer right in the pocketbook. Just by comparison, in the US, we have 30% of our wealth in property, 21% in stocks, and 32% in pensions. I'm going to guess that last one skews to the older generation, but wow, 32% in pensions. I'm going to guess that's also Social Security, although I don't know that for sure, but I'm going to guess that's where that comes from. In Japan, how about Japan? 34% of household wealth in Japan is cash. Cash. Can you imagine holding cash and watching it deteriorate? Ouch. Taiwan, where my wife's from, 24% cash. And then shout out Korea, much like China, 65% of the family's household wealth is in property, which I thought was pretty interesting. Fannie Mae's housing market will come roaring back. That's their words, roaring back in 2026 as rates go below 6%. They expect the mortgage market, shout out all the mortgage brokers, they expect $500 billion, I'm sorry, not $500 billion, $500 billion, $500 trillion, not billion, $500 trillion, $470 billion to be exact, in mortgage refis and purchase. And then finally expect transactions to go from 4.7, that's existing plus new, to 5.1 in 2026. Folks, rates matter. Shout out King Griffin with another warning for us. I see echoes of the .com bubble. Obviously, Ken is referring to the AI stocks. And let's close with Fed speak. We've got Fed President Hammack, Daly, Barkin, and Bowman. Let's go to the most hawkish. I believe Fed President Hammack is the most hawkish. She highlights that we are going through challenging times. Thank you for the wisdom. Next, worried about the inflation side. She indicates that we have been missing our target for 4.5 years. Inflation has been above 2% for 4.5 years. She is concerned about that. I think we need to maintain restrictive stance so we can get inflation back to target. I again think, folks, over this month, we're going to find out who's a hawk and who's a dove. I personally put Hammack as one of the most hawkish Fed members. Little note here, little asterisk. Hammack is not a voting member. If you guys don't know what that means, they have 18 members of the Fed board, but only 12 vote at a time. They recycle every year. So the most hawkish, not a voting member this time, which I think might be good timing, I guess. Fed President Daly, the neutral rate is about 3%. Okay, great. What does that mean? That means we could cut 4 times and get to neutral. Fed President Daly is particularly worried about college graduates having a hard time finding work. Indicates that this is an early sign of the job market problems. Fed President Barkin, I see monthly break-even job creation 0 to 50,000. This is a significant revision. If you were to ask Fed presidents last year, it was somewhere between 100 and 125,000. Now we're at 0 to 50,000 just to break even. Not good. Unemployment looks shakier. Inflation is better. So again, Barkin is a dove, kind of opposite of Hammock. Consumers are exhausted by price increases. This goes back to something I'm trying to help you understand called demand destruction. I think what we're seeing is some consumers simply are refusing to participate in the economy. Lastly, we'll talk about Fed President Bowman. I see the neutral rate at 3%, much like Daly. Again, that would mean 4 cuts are possible to get to neutral. The neutral rate actually might be falling as our population ages. That's interesting. So watch the baby boomer or watch the aging of our population. I thought that was an interesting comment. And then finally, I strongly support only holding U.S. treasuries. Again, Bowman is saying the quiet part out loud. Don't buy mortgage-backed securities. I guess the last thing to give a shout out to Electronic Arts. Looks like Electronic Arts is going private. $210 a share or $55 billion. Folks, a lot of stuff going on. Let's congratulate Owie. Owie and his wife are coming to the Vegas event. Again, folks, you've got 2 days and 2 days only left to buy your Vegas tickets. You will get autographed books. In case of Owie, he's going to get both because he bought 2 tickets. If you buy one, you can pick your book. You also get $100 in teachable credits. I'll email you a link so you can tell me what you want. And you'll get an October conversation. Also, don't forget to join school. It is 67 pennies a day. Nearly 500 members go in the right direction. And of course, folks, don't forget the sponsor of the daily financial news, Steadily. If you are a landlord, you know insurance is going up, and it behooves you to get a second or third quote. See who gives you the best coverage at the best rates. Steadily just recently saved me $1,124, I think. Might have been $23 on a duplex that I own. So shout out them. Maybe they can help you. Maybe they can't. But you won't know until you try. There is a link in the description below. Folks, take care of yourself. Have a wonderful day. Later.